Okay, myth number 3. Gluten-free foods are healthier than gluten-containing counterparts. Now, we alluded to this a moment ago when we were talking about, the traditional versus the true gluten-free diet, right? And we said that true gluten-free diets, which are diets of whole, healthy, good food, versus traditional, which is highly processed. Okay, again, highly processed food. Most people, when they see it on the package, you see this woman here in the picture, this is gluten-free. So she's smiling, right? Big old smile. She's smiling because she thinks it's healthier. It's gluten-free. Okay, let me just draw your attention back to a point in time about 15 years ago. If you remember the war on fat, right? Everything was fat-free. Everything was fat-free. And so what did food manufacturers started to do? They removed fat from the foods and they added sugar to foods. And so they started, instead of saying it's gluten-free, now we're saying it's fat-free. Was that good for us? No. It's what we call window dressing. It's what marketers do. They try to confuse you. They try to put healthy quotes on a package to delineate that something might be healthier, right? So that they put it in your mind that it's healthier, so you'll buy more of it. But packaged gluten-free food, for the most part, most of it is junk food. There are exceptions to the rule, but most of it is just highly processed food full of either corn, rice, starch, with poor nutrient density. Okay, now on top of that, these foods are high in hydrogenated fat. Important that you understand hydrogenated fat, and they're high in sugar. That's not good for you. None of these things are good for you, right? So if you have it in your mind that just because the label says gluten-free, that somehow that magically transforms the ingredients of that package into something that might be healthy for you, you need to learn how to read the label. Label reading is key. So if it comes in a package and it says gluten-free, you can't just assume that it's gluten-free. You got to read the label. Look at what's in it. Identify what's in your food. Don't just trust that GF on the label is somehow going to make that food healthy. Now, let's look at, this is a study recently published by a good friend of mine, Tom O'Brien. Those of you who've been following me for a while might also know Tom O'Brien, Dr. O'Brien. Navigating the gluten-free boom, the dark side of the gluten-free diet. Now, this is kind of a research that Tom and Dr. Lerner and Dr. Matthias all put together on what we see in terms of gluten-free diets that are high in processed food. Again, keyword, high in processed food. We see nutrient deficiencies in iron, calcium, sodium, vitamins D, C, A, E, B vitamins, that includes vitamin B12, thiamine, which is B1, riboflavin, which is riboflavin, which is B2, niacin, which is B3, folate, which is B9, zinc, magnesium, selenium. It's low in fiber. It's low in essential amino acids, which are important for growth and regulation, and it's low in gamma-linolenic acid. So poor in these things. Okay, here we found in this publication that gluten-free diets of processed food contain excessive quantities of saturated fat, sugar, and total calories. Okay. We also found that they were high in omega-6 fatty acids, higher in arachidonic acid and docosahexaenoic acid ratio, meaning, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, is an omega-3 that feeds the brain. It's what I like to call brain fat. It's the stuff that makes your white matter, very important for the prevention, if you will, very important for maintenance of brain and cognitive function, especially as we age. We're seeing a lot of elderly with Alzheimer's being low in DHA. Well, gluten-free foods are very low in DHA, and they're high in arachidonic acid, AA. And arachidonic acid is a type of fat that helps trigger an inflammatory response. So when you have a diet that's low in DHA and high in arachidonic acid, you've got a kind of this masterful recipe of fat-induced inflammation. And of course, inflammation, depending on where it's happening, if it's happening in your brain, that can create problems with thought and cognitive function. If it's happening in your joints, it can create pain, etc. They also found that the gluten-free diet, as done with processed food, is higher in pro-inflammatory fatty acids. So again, we're talking about a processed gluten-free diet. We're not talking about a true gluten-free diet, which is a healthy gluten-free diet. These things here. They also found that a processed food gluten-free diet was high in heavy metals like arsenic, mercury, lead, and cadmium. This is especially true because of rice. Rice pulls heavy toxic metals out of the soil really well, and a lot of the rice that's been researched and measured has high levels of heavy metal. We also know that gluten-free foods contain high levels of food additives and enzymes like microbial transglutaminase, otherwise known as meat glue. Now, you've heard me talk about meat glue a number of times because meat glue can mimic, and that's what we're finding, it mimics gluten. So if you're gluten sensitive and you're eating a gluten-free food that has lots of meat glue used in the processing, you actually can react to that food the same way you might react to gluten. And so again, that's not a healthy food for you. So those of you maybe that are eating all this junk food that says it's gluten-free and you're still struggling, take note of what I'm saying tonight. Take note of what I'm teaching you, because if you do and you move away from this stuff, you're going to move away from toxic metals, you're going to move away from toxic food additives, you're going to move away from a poor omega-3 fatty acid ratio, you're going to move away from excessive sugar, excessive calories, and you're going to move into more nutritional density into your diet. So then we got this other review here. This was published in Clinical Nutrition in 2016. Results: gluten-free diet was found to be poor in fiber, particularly because of the necessary avoidance of several kinds of foods that are naturally rich in fiber. Remember, grain is rich in fiber. There's no doubt. And is fiber good for us? Yes, it is. Fiber is very good for us. A lot of research behind the importance of getting adequate dietary fiber. Now, that being said, if you're gluten sensitive, you can't get that fiber from grain. And so when you go grain-free, gluten-free, if you don't have another source for fiber coming into your diet, then this is why. If you look over here and what they were pointing out, and what we pointed out, you can see here, it's fibers here, right? Fibers here. And I showed you another study earlier that showed that people that followed that gluten-free diet, who going to that gluten-free aisle in the grocery store, those individuals, again, here we go, right? Low dietary fiber intake. So this is a problem, because when you cut grain out, grain is one of the primary sources in the human diet for most people of fiber. And so if you're cutting that grain out and you don't have a strategy for fiber in your diet, it can actually end up creating microbiome changes. Okay, so this is where, if you follow a true gluten-free diet, what are you getting? What's different about a true gluten-free diet versus a traditional gluten-free diet? Well, one of the things that a true gluten-free diet, it has lots of vegetable fiber. That is, if you can tolerate it. Some of you can't. It also has things like pectin, and it has foods that are fermented. Fermented foods that are rich in natural probiotics that help restore the natural probiotic levels in your GI tract. So true gluten-free diet contains, again, lots of vegetable options. Nuts contain some fiber as well. There are two types of seeds that actually are pretty rich in fiber. Chia and flax are options for good fiber. Broccoli sprouts are an option for good fiber. So there's a lot of options for fiber from vegetables, from nuts, and from chia, flax, etc., fermented foods. And what happens is most people, when you go traditionally gluten-free, packaged processed foods doesn't really contain these things, right? Some do, but not to any great degree. The other places you can get fiber is that, some of you don't tolerate broccoli, or some of you don't tolerate goitrogenic or foods like cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, those types of cruciferous foods. So, you might need to do things like beetroot or other root vegetables to get some fiber. Root vegetables are a great source fiber as well. But again, non-processed. So we're talking about from the real food itself, not the food that's been cooked down infinitely, been stripped of nutrients, and then added to processed or packaged foods. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's going to get you right here in this place. Deficient, toxic, and fatty acid ratio imbalance. So remember those differences, because it's not the gluten-free diet. It's how people choose to define their personal gluten-free diet. So remember, a gluten-free diet can be good for you, but it can also be very, very bad for you, depending on how you choose to go and embark upon a gluten-free diet. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.